Hey everyone, welcome to Logan's Mosh Pit. Glad to have you here. Do me a favor and please subscribe if you haven't already. Yes indeed, time for another rock and read. I've got a double whammy for you today. Chapter 31 and Chapter 32 of Iron Man by the riffmaster from Black Sabbath, Tony Iommi. Let's find out what happens next. My first wife was Susan Snowden. I met her through Patrick Meehan in his office in London. Meehan was from a very well-to-do family himself. He mixed with high society people, had the suit and the rolls, and went to all the in places. I presume that's how he met Susan. She wanted to do some singing, so I said, "I'll write you a song." Of course, I never did. She came up to my house one day, and it was a bit awkward. I found out she couldn't sing at all, and she found out I hadn't written a song for her. But we did go out to dinner, and that's how it all started. We were totally opposite people. Susan's parents and her family were all right, but some of her friends? Bloody hell! Oh, what do you do then? You play the, what is it? A plink, a plonk? Ah, you do this? Very condescending. I really did not want to go near these people. Susan reacted to my friends in much the same way as I reacted to hers. So she'd go and see her friends, and I'd go and see mine. That might not sound like a very solid basis for a relationship, but we lasted for 8 years. A fairly long time. Of course, I was on tour most of that time. We had a very peculiar relationship. She was always too posh for me, really. We planned to get married on November 3rd, 1973. Before I could marry Susan, I had to meet her parents at their enormous mansion and ask her father for his daughter's hand. I was really nervous when I got there. They brought the cakes out, and the tea and teapots and little cups, and I thought, God, I hope I don't knock something over. But her father and mother were very down-to-earth, honorable people. I got on really well with them. Of course, when we got married, we were going to have the reception at their house. I was thinking, oh, bloody hell, what's going to happen when they see my friends? But first, I needed to survive my stag night. It was only John Bonham, me, and a driver. We went to clubs around Birmingham, and the last one we hit just before closing time was Sloopy's on Corporation Street. John said, "Let's go and have one last drink." Right, one last drink. He had the bloody bar lined up with 12 bottles of champagne and 12 glasses, and he said to the bartender, "Pour them out." I thought he was going to treat everybody in the club, but no, he said, "This is for you." Off, John. I'm getting married in the morning. If I drink that, you're never going to see me there. Well, I'll drink them then. Which he duly did. Of course, within half an hour, he was absolutely paralytic, and he was going, whoa. To make matters worse, the club was closing, and we had to get out. Sloopy's was upstairs, and the stairs to the exit were steep. On our way out, John grabbed the owner of the club around the neck, and of course the bloke fell down the stairs. He hurt himself, so he wasn't very happy. Our driver and me finally managed to get Bonham out of the club and into the car, and we took him home first. When we got to John's house, he didn't have his keys on him. It was 4 o'clock in the morning. I pressed the doorbell. Nothing. Again. Nothing. Then the lights went on upstairs. His wife, Pat, opened the window and shouted, "He's not coming in!" I said, "Pat, please let him in. I'm getting married in the morning, and he has gotta be there. He's not coming in. Please. Finally, Pat said, all right, but he's not coming upstairs then. If he's coming in, he can sleep downstairs. Okay. She came down, opened the door, and ran straight back upstairs. We carried John in, put him in the hallway, sat him against a radiator, and I said to him, you're not going to make it tomorrow, are you? He put his thumb up and slurred, yeah, I'll be there. The driver took me home, and I thought, bloody hell, John's never going to turn up, and I'll be without a best man. I had to be there at some silly hour, and I couldn't believe it. 8 o'clock sharp, I saw Bonham coming up the drive, with his top hat and tails on, all dressed up. He lived a good 35 minutes from my house, and I hadn't even had a shave or anything yet. I opened the door, and he was all chipper and energetic, going, I'm ready. Are you? I actually felt worse than him. We got in the car, and of course, we immediately did a quick couple of toots. I thought, oh dear, so this is how the day is going to be. We got to the bloody church, and before we went in, all our lot kept disappearing behind the building, one after the other, having a line. Come back, snort, and go. Right. And then somebody else would go, I'll be back in a minute. On my wife's side, they were wondering where they kept going off to. And I was thinking, I can't do this. Once inside, my friends were all sniffing and snorting, all those sounds going on in the church. It was terrible. And then you had her side, all immaculate and straight. I had written this instrumental thing called Fluff. They played the tape when Susan walked down the aisle, and it started going wrong. First it came on, then it went off, and it came on again, and everybody started giggling. A total disaster. When the guy said, is there anybody here who's got anything to say about why these two should not be joined in matrimony? I was convinced somebody was going to shout out. But they didn't. They were just sneering. I was bloody glad to get out of that church. When we got back to the house for the reception, they were all disappearing again. More lines. My mother-in-law said, it's funny, none of your friends are eating. Of course, I said, oh, really? I wonder why. John Bonham and Ozzy and a few others were notorious drinkers who'd play up once they had had a few. That's why we thought it best to just have a toast and champagne, and after that, not to have any more alcohol. It really didn't go down very well. We had the champagne toast, and then a top-up with apple juice, and Bonham spat it out and went, apple juice. Susan's side never swore, so I thought, oh no, this will upset the cart. My mother saved the day. She said to Bonham, don't worry, John, we'll go back to my house. I've got plenty of booze there. They all sneaked off to Mum's house and carried on drinking there. If it weren't for her, there would have probably been antiques going through the walls on account of all that apple juice. Well, that wraps up chapter 31, so let's move on to chapter 32. Susan didn't want to live in my house in Stafford, so we decided to move to a place between London and Birmingham. We were looking at houses to buy, but couldn't find anything we liked. One day, her dad said, why don't you come and live here? This house is far too big for us. Sue went, that's an idea. And so, we did. We had a major part of this massive 200-room house. My father-in-law built a partition between their living quarters and ours, and we lived there for quite a few years. Just like in Carlisle, we weren't the only ones there. I saw an apparition going up the stairs one night. It wasn't like a three-dimensional person. It was more like a figure. And I had more weird things happening there. We had these big old-fashioned keys in the doors to all the bedrooms. I was in the lounge one night, and I had my briefcase open. I closed it, and I went upstairs to bed. I heard this big bang, and I ran downstairs again. One of the big paintings had fallen off the wall. I walked into the lounge, and my briefcase was open. And I went to open the door, and the keys had gone. All of them. Never found them again. I talked about this to my in-laws, and they said, yeah, there is a ghost here, but he's a friendly ghost. Things like that make you really think. A poltergeist, for a start, can be horrible, but they can move an object. I've always been able to see things that most other people can't. It's hard to talk about it because people think, right, he's had too many substances. But I actually did see things, like the Carlisle ghost. Saw him as clear as day. I always wondered about what happens when you're done, when you're beyond this world, and tried to find information about that in books. While living at the big house, I read a lot of books by Lobsang Rampa. He was a writer who claimed to have been a Tibetan monk before spending his later years in the body of an Englishman, or so he wrote. I started getting into all this leaving the body stuff, astral traveling. I really believed in it, and that made me want to do it. I planned it, and thought about it, and tried it a few times, but nothing happened. When I finally managed to do it for the first time, I came out of my body, and with a jolt, suddenly jumped back in. You feel it pulling you back as your astral is leaving your body. You feel this pull up your spine. I must have got frightened, and I came straight back in. Once I had done that, I was determined to make it work properly. I kept practicing. You've got to be by yourself in a room, and you have to really, really relax. But not to the point of falling asleep, because you have to stay conscious. And then, you will yourself to leave. At first, it's funny, because you feel like you're falling. Most people have had that feeling when in bed. You go, ooh. You experience a jolt. That's when your astral comes back in your body when you dream. You're asleep, and you're just about to leave your body, and if you move, woof, it comes straight back in, and you get that jolt. After a while, it worked. I came out my body. It was weird. I floated around the room and looked down on myself from the ceiling, and I could leave the room, go through walls, and go off to the roof. It sounds mad, but once I even went along the beach. You come back. You're attached by a silver cord that pulls you back. If that's ever severed, you don't. So it can be risky. When you dream and your astral leaves your body and an entity is in the lower class astral and it pulls on your silver cord and annoys you, you get these horrible dreams. It could be caused by drinking, just anything. I know it sounds odd, but I have experienced all that, and it opened another world to me. I don't know why I don't do it anymore. I didn't follow it through. I've actually tried it a couple of times, and nothing. I can't leave my body anymore. But in those days, I could do it quite easily. I got to a point where I could do it without falling asleep. I still believe you can go to a non-physical plane of existence. You can go there, and you can look back on your life in a thing called the Akashic Records. I really think that's what happens. You can go and see whether you've achieved what you wanted to achieve, and if not, you can be born into another body and try again. Back to the reality of living in that huge house. I tried to rebuild and redecorate it. I phoned up this one company, and I saw this painter and decorator's van come up the long drive. He came to the house, looked at it, turned around, and drove straight off. I just couldn't find the people who could take on a place that size, so I had to get contractors in who normally did schools. You wouldn't be able to buy huge properties like that anymore, but in those days, they were still quite affordable. And now it's a wonderful hotel, Kilworth House. The old snooker room is now the dining room, and the conservatory is still intact, as there were only 3 of those in the country, and there is a preservation order on it. All I did with it at the time was grow tomatoes in it, and some exotic plants. But probably the most exotic thing in that place at the time was a long-haired guy from Aston, who only a few years earlier had shared his tiny bedroom with a lodger who came from nowhere, 1,000,000 boxes of peas, and a phone that kept disappearing. Well, that's the end of chapter 32. Let me know what you thought of both chapters in the comments below. That does it for today's video, guys. I hope you enjoyed. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. I really appreciate the support. I'll see you next time. Till then, rock on